It was a cold, foggy evening in the small town of Ravenswood. The streets were empty, and the only sound was the distant ticking of the old clock tower. Detective Arthur Collins sat in his cozy office, sipping on a cup of steaming tea. The fire in the fireplace crackled softly, and the room was filled with the scent of old books and tobacco. Collins was known as the best detective in town, solving cases that left others scratching their heads. But tonight, something unusual was about to happen. The telephone on his desk rang sharply, breaking the silence. Collins picked it up, and a panicked voice on the other end cried, "Detective, you must come quickly. There's been a murder." "Who is this?" Collins asked, sitting up straight. "It's Mrs. Whitmore, from Elm Street. Please, hurry." The line went dead. Collins grabbed his coat and hat and rushed out into the night. The fog was thick, and the streetlights cast eerie shadows on the cobblestone roads. When he arrived at Mrs. Whitmore's house, he found her standing on the porch, trembling. "Thank goodness you're here," she exclaimed. "It's my husband. He's dead." Collins followed her inside. The house was quiet, except for the sound of a grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. In the study, he found Mr. Whitmore slumped over his desk. A pool of blood had formed beneath him, and a knife lay on the floor nearby. "Tell me what happened," Collins said, examining the scene. "I was in the kitchen when I heard a loud noise," Mrs. Whitmore explained. "I came to check and found him like this. Then I called you." Collins noticed something strange. The telephone in the study was off the hook. He picked it up and heard a faint dial tone. "Did you use this phone to call me?" he asked. "No, I used the one in the hallway," Mrs. Whitmore replied. Collins frowned. If she hadn't used the study phone, then who had? He looked around the room and noticed a small notepad on the desk. The top page had been torn off, but he could see faint impressions of writing on the next page. He held it up to the light and saw the words, "Meet me at midnight. Don't tell anyone. Did your husband have any enemies?" Collins asked. Mrs. Whitmore hesitated. "Well, there was Mr. Grayson. He and my husband had a business dispute recently. They argued loudly just last week. Collins decided to pay Mr. Grayson a visit. The man lived just a few blocks away. When he arrived, Grayson answered the door, looking surprised. "Detective Collins? What brings you here at this hour?" "I'm investigating the murder of Mr. Whitmore," Collins said, watching Grayson's reaction closely. Grayson's face turned pale. "Murder? I had nothing to do with that." "Yes, we had a disagreement, but I would never harm him." Collins wasn't convinced. "Where were you tonight?" "I was at home, alone," Grayson replied. As Collins left Grayson's house, he noticed something odd. The telephone wire leading to the house had been cut. He followed the wire and found a small, muddy footprint beneath the window. Someone had been here recently. Back at the Whitmore house, Collins examined the study again. This time, he noticed a small piece of paper stuck in the corner of the desk drawer. It was a receipt from a local cafe, dated earlier that evening. The name on the receipt was E. Grayson. Collins returned to Grayson's house and confronted him. "You were at the cafe tonight. Why did you lie?" Grayson sighed. "All right, I was there. But I didn't kill Whitmore. I went to the cafe to meet someone. A woman. I didn't want my wife to find out." Collins realized Grayson was telling the truth. But if he wasn't the killer, then who was? He went back to the Whitmore house and spoke to Mrs. Whitmore again. This time, he noticed something he had missed before. Her hands were trembling, and there was a faint smear of blood on her sleeve. "Mrs. Whitmore," Collins said gently, "did you kill your husband?" She burst into tears. Yes, I did. He was going to leave me for another woman. I couldn't bear it. I called you from the hallway phone, but I also used the study phone to make it look like someone else had been here. I thought if I blamed Mr. Grayson, no one would suspect me. Collins nodded sadly. I'm sorry, Mrs. Whitmore, but you'll have to come with me. As he led her out of the house, the fog began to lift, and the first light of dawn appeared on the horizon. Another mystery solved, but not without a tragedy.